Hello gamers, Power Heal here, and today we're going to be talking about heal prediction in Classic WoW. I guess just kind of like in WoW in general, but this is a bit of a departure from the Naxx content just for a moment because I had an interesting comment that was dropped on one of the Naxx videos that was asking about heal prediction and my thoughts about it. So I figured this would be a good way to kind of break up some of the content because I was going to do a bit more tier list content anyway. And I know sometimes that can get a bit redundant for people. And I think this is an interesting topic, and it's kind of a relevant issue to dive into. So I'll actually just read the comments, and we'll just kind of go from there. So it's Spectalage, I think. I'm not entirely sure. I have a suggestion for a video in which you could discuss the pros and cons of using heal prediction add-ons like HealCom. I'm a staunch proponent of it, as I think it's helpful to coordinate heals so that every healer chooses an individual lower target, and that way you avoid deaths and save mana by reducing overhealing, especially on these longer fights. The people I raid with disagree. They say that's bad because they would cancel their heal on a target when they see that target is already being healed, and then that target dies. So yeah, that's basically the gist of the premise, and I'll kind of get into that and just kind of talk about my thoughts on HealCom in general. So I was actually going to make a HealCom video but I was going to wait until Classic Plus because I actually think the HealCom, I agree with the commenter here that I think HealCom is such an important functionality to have in the game, or heal prediction, however you want to say it. And I think that not having it kind of going forward into Classic Plus on the default frames would be a mistake. And I think that it would actually make such a difference and kind of make everybody a better healer if it was on the frames. And I think that this is bore out as well by the fact that the designers seem to agree with this, because in retail it is now available on the frames like as default. You don't have to do any plugins from what I'm aware of. I'm pretty sure you can just see heal prediction. It's like a setting you can turn on. You may be able to turn it off. I'm not sure if you can toggle it. It's fine if you can toggle it, but I believe it's definitely something that's in the retail frames. So we'll kind of address this concern, and then we'll talk about some other concerns I've heard, and then we'll kind of wrap it up with just like my thoughts about why overall I think it's necessary and the best. And so the concern is basically just that, the idea is if you see that a target is already being healed, you're less likely to heal a target, and then that target's going to die. And I kind of understand this concern on the surface. It doesn't sound like terribly irrational, but I think especially when you look into how healing tends to go out in Classic WoW, it makes even less sense than it would normally. I think even in like a normal situation, it's unlikely that really things play out the way that those people are concerned about them playing out. So typically, you have very few targets in Classic WoW that are taking sustained damage, right? A lot of it is kind of like something that'll go out, like the Molten Giant Stomp is a very good example of this, where all your melee are going to get chunked, and then it's going to be quite a while before another Stomp goes out. You see this with other fights too, like on the Bug Trio, like a big Poison Volley will go out. Even on a fight like Visk, where you have less time in between the volleys, like the volley is more of a constant thing, there's still a decent amount of time to essentially get people back to full in between those volleys. So it's not typical that you're having players that aren't your tank take a prolonged amount of sustained damage over a period of time. It's very much like they get hit, they get healed, and then you kind of move on. So HealCom is very good at handling situations like this in particular, right? Because any subsequent heal past the first heal in a lot of these cases, especially when you're using higher rank heals, pretty much is going to result in quite a bit of overhealing on the target. So if we're doing the Molten Giant example, like I said, in Molten Core, and the melee gets hit, and there's Random Warrior X gets targeted by two healers, and they're both using max rank flash heal, okay? Then basically what's going to happen is one of those is going to hit first, the other one is going to hit for, basically full overheal. which is just a complete waste of mana. Not only is it a waste of mana, but it's a kind of like an opportunity cost issue, right? Because you only have you have to think of like every choice you make in this game, especially with the global being what it is, and most abilities having a cast time, right? So it's not like we're playing a game where you have instant casts and you have a very low GCD. You have a very long GCD, 1.5 seconds, and most of the casts, even at minimum, are 1.5 seconds. You have some instant casts, but even those are now bound by the GCD, right? So even a 1.5 second cast, even an instant cast effectively is like a 1.5 second cast in terms of being able to retarget the next target, which means that every decision you make is actually quite important. And this is something that I'll maybe make another video on, but I think this is why Classic WoW healing is a lot more nuanced and kind of dynamic than people claim it is, because you have way less tools to deal with a lot of problems, especially problems of multiple people taking damage at once, which means that you really need to make your globals count. Otherwise, people will just die. If you're not targeting the right person at the right time, then you won't get another chance to target them very quickly, right? They can absolutely die within the window you'll be able to get another heal out. Because you're, like I said, even if you cast something instant like a shield, it's a 1.5 second cooldown. And if you cast the shield on the wrong person, now you need to wait 4 seconds for the cooldown, 4 or 5 seconds for the cooldown on the shield to shield somebody else. Or if you're going to flash heal that person, you need to wait the 1.5 seconds and then the cast time of the heal to actually get another heal onto that next person. So when you overheal the same target, it's not just about the waste of mana. Like I said, it completely can cause somebody else to die, because you could have healed somebody else who now is taking fatal damage. And HealCom is just excellent at preventing this, right? Because it's going to show you basically if you were the first to that target. Now, it's not necessarily perfect, right? Because how it works, at least from the one I use, there's no way to differentiate your heal, I believe, versus other people's heals, which is actually a functionality that I think that this should absolutely be included in future heal comms, something like a Classic Plus heal comm. But the idea is that if I cast a flash heal on target X and another priest cast a flash heal at the exact same time, the heal comm is not going to be able to tell me or distinguish which one is mine and which one is his. At least the version I use. If you guys have better versions that can do that, please let me know, because I love to use them. And in that sense, it can't prevent every case of overlap. But most of the time, people are not going to be exactly the same, like going on to a target at the same time, which means that you're going to be able to pretty much clearly see if the heal comm goes right away. Like if you cast the heal and you see the heal comm bar jump up, it's probably your heal. And you can be pretty safe in letting that heal go off, and it's probably going to be all you and not overhealing. So just that alone is huge, right? And if you just play into that, like if you don't stress too much about like, oh, well, what if somebody else casts at the exact same time? If you just send heals that look like they're good heals on the heal comm, you're going to be absolutely fine, and heal comm is going to be a benefit for you, okay? The only time I think that heal comm could be a detriment on the raid in particular is if you're somebody who's so in your head about overhealing and you have such this like negative idea of like, oh, I can't do any overhealing at all, man. It's so bad. I got to use this heal comm add-on to the maximum nth degree possible to make sure that I do like, 2.5% overhealing. If that is your concern, then you're going to have problems with heal comm, because you're going to be second guessing yourself all the time. Did I get that guy? Did somebody else get that guy? Right? And you can get really in your head about it fast. But as long as you're being reasonable, it's a very helpful add-on to use, and I don't think it hurts healing on the raid at all. Like I said, it can only be better, because it not only saves your mana, right, but it also it prevents you from like losing opportunity cost, right? You can actually save somebody now that otherwise maybe wouldn't have been saved. Now, on the tank, things are a little bit different, and I have a feeling that this is where the thrust of that comment was, where it's like, oh, if you're casting on somebody and you see that somebody else is casting on them, then you're not going to cast on them. I think the thrust of that is towards the tank. And I can kind of see what they mean there as well, right? But the problem is that you know that the tank needs constant heals, right? The tank is sort of the exception to the rule. So the tank is not really something, like when we're using heal comm, we're not really using it for the tank most of the time. It can be useful on the tank, okay? But that's not really the main purpose of using heal comm. Heal comm, in my opinion, in this version of the game, is really more about just knowing when a bunch of your raid takes damage and you're having to use a single target heal, right? Because the damage is kind of distributed through a bunch of groups. Which target you're picking, you want to know that your heal is actually going off and that target is doing something. That's what heal comm is for. It's not for tank healing. Like, nobody is ever going to think on Patchwork, oh, look, the tank is, he's got a green filler bar from 70% to 100, so I don't need to cast any heals on this guy, right? I mean, a new player might think that, but I think this is something that you can communicate very easily through Discord, whether it be in your healer channel before the run, or in a, just voice call, like what I used to do when I was like heal lead in 2019 for my guild, is I would just bring the healers up a channel like 10 minutes before the raid if they were there. I'd be like, if you can show up 10 minutes early or 15 minutes early, that's great. If you can't, I get it. But if you can, just show up early, and I just want to talk to you guys about some things that I saw last time there were problems, some things that I want you guys to do this time to focus on. And you can mention this. You can mention it every raid, basically, if you think it's still going to be a problem. Right, until kind of people get the message and they understand what's going on. So yeah, I think I can understand his concern for tank players, or for players that are healing a tank. But yeah, I just really don't think that it's that big of a problem overall. So that's kind of like my thoughts about why I think those concerns aren't that important. And now I guess we can move on to why I think it's such a positive to have it. Now, we already mentioned the opportunity cost and the mana saving. Right, and I think that in a version of the game like this, that is kind of like where a lot of the skill expression lies. In other versions of WoW, healing is sort of done differently, and it's a lot more about coordination with the team, maybe using certain group cooldowns at certain points, right? But in Classic WoW, it really is picking the right target, and there's basically no other way that you could there's no other way that you could pick the right target consistently if you did not have heal comm. And I'm gonna take a little bit of a detour here to talk about other add-ons and why Blizzard looks like they're kind of moving in a direction to remove other add-ons, and why I think this would be bad for heal comm, and why we definitely need to keep heal comm out of all the potential add-ons kind of going into future versions of the game. So if you guys are only Classic players, you may not have really followed the kind of like add-on pruning that's going on in retail. But basically what they're doing is they're removing a bunch of add-ons, and they're trying to provide, in some cases, in-game functionality for them, which is obviously good, I think, because you would just rather have the stuff be available in-game so people don't have to go outside the game to get it. Makes total sense. But in that process, we're also losing a bunch of functionality on some add-ons, right? And it's mainly because Blizzard just doesn't think that it's necessary for players to have all that information. I think that there's kind of two factors that kind of come into play there. The first one is that they think, if you look at some people's streams, right, when they're doing Race for World First and stuff like that, if you watch that and you're thinking of getting into the game, you're just like, what is all this stuff on the screen, bro? It's crazy. Like it's just overwhelming for a new player, right? And they don't really like that. And then the other aspect of it is, I think that they actually think, and I would agree with this, that when you give a player too much information, it actually kind of lowers the skill cap a bit of what's going on in the game. Because if you have, let's say, for example, Onyxia always did a deep breath on a cooldown, right? So it was every 2 minutes she would deep breath, okay? Or maybe every 2 minutes within 20 seconds of that timer she would deep breath. So all you'd have to do is you'd have your little timer, your DBM timer, and when it counts down, and it's the 2 minutes is up, you're paying attention for maybe 20 seconds at tops, and you see she's deep breathing, you move out of the way, right? Now, that's fine, but wouldn't it be a better show of skill expression and awareness if you had to be constantly looking at these things and looking for just when she's going to do it? There's no timer. You don't have a 2-minute timer that just keeps track of everything. So even if the idea is, even if the boss abilities are on an internal timer, you would have to have that internal perception of time in your head, and you can't rely on the add-on just showing that to you. And that is another form of awareness, is another form of skill expression that you can use to separate yourself from other players. So I am all for this and stuff like this and removing a lot of that functionality, right? The problem is when you look at trying to remove heal comm, right? If you kind of include it into that thing that's giving you too much information, seeing other people's heals, you have to ask, what is the purpose of removing things, right? And it's very clear in the example we just gave. If we're removing the timers, it's not only is it making everything seem simpler for people who, are kind of just getting into the game, but it's also increasing the skill expression because it's more relying on people's own internal mechanisms to keep track of all this information, right? So we're increasing skill expression and reducing just kind of like the shock factor on the screen when new players are getting into the game. So totally makes sense. When you remove heal comm, though, what do you actually accomplish? You just cause more overhealing, and there's no way to know who's going to be healing who because you can't afford to calm out every heal you're doing to every player. It's just impractical, right? Like that would be like nobody's going to want to do that. That's going to be super unfun. It's going to force voice usage even more than it already is now, right? So people like who maybe don't have a mic or are shy to talk basically can't even play the game at all now because that's what would be like required. So nobody's doing that, right? Nobody's calling out every individual heal. And you could say, well, it puts a lot of emphasis on assignments, and assignments are good because they're something you can do before the raid, preparation, right? They allow you to tackle the content, and it shows who's the better prepared guild, right? Who had the better assignments. But the problem with the assignment thing is, like I talked about in my assignments video, assignments are great, but ultimately these should just be kind of guidelines, right? And nobody wants to just sit and heal the same person over and over and over again. And not only do they not want to do that, it's less effective to do that when you can branch out and do smart healing that makes sense on targets that need it in the interim there. And that's what something like HealComm really allows you to do. So there's no other. This is a situation where gaining more information is actually increasing the skill expression because it's allowing you to have a new decision tree now. Like before, you would just cast your heal, and if it happens to land on an overheal target, then, well, too bad. Nothing you can really do, right? Whereas now, the idea is you can choose to be like, okay, you know what? Like, he doesn't actually need that. Like, I know that heal is going to take him to full, or maybe I will, let my heal finish because maybe both of our heals are needed to take him to full, or maybe I'll downrank this heal because that heal that's being casted on him won't take him to full alone. My heal will overheal him, but if I do a rank 4 flash heal instead of a rank 7, now he'll be topped off perfectly. So it allows you to make these kind of more intricate decisions by yourself without there being a complete communication cluster bang in the voice comms or anything like that, right? Which nobody wants. So you're really increasing the skill expression in the game when you add something like HealComm, and to not have it is just, it's also like less fun, right? Because it also just encourages people or discourages people rather from trying to kind of go above and beyond and help out their raid members when they need it, right? Because they never know if it's just going to be a waste of mana or not. So HealComm is it's vital, in my opinion, to not only the fun of the healer role, right? That part adds a bit of dynamic content to it, but it's also it also makes the game easier. I think it's very intuitive for players to see who's healing who on the healing on the raid frames, right? So unlike when you maybe see a bunch of timers on somebody's screen, they're like, oh, that's intimidating. I think as a healer, it makes a lot of sense. It's actually more comforting to be able to see who's getting healed in the HealComm scenario. So that's something that is a completely different beast than a lot of the other things they're removing, and they need to ensure that this stays in the game, not only via add-on support, if that's how they're going to do it, but if they're going to do the same add-on pruning and add-on removal, in Classic, then they need to make sure they have a functionality of that going forward into Classic Plus. And I believe they will, because they, like I said, the retail version of the Raid frames now has a heal comm built in. So it would be very surprising for me if they remove that for Midnight in retail, and then it would also be very surprising if they remove it for a future version of Classic Plus or something of the sort. And I'm going to address like kind of one more point where that kind of relates to all this in HealComm, because as the commenter mentioned, right, part of the reason why they think it's helpful is just reducing overhealing, right? And there's a lot of people that seem to be very against overhealing discussions, or like trying to lower overhealing. They think that overhealing is like absolutely fine. There's no issue with doing overheal. And really, it's just highly contextual, right? There's going to be some fights where it makes more sense to overheal, and there's going to be some fights where it makes less sense to overheal. But I would argue that in almost, like, it's kind of like 95% of situations, there's very few fights in this game where you really need to truly spam a tank, like, you know, you're just, like, mashing the button and sending it, right? And there's very, very, very few fights like that. You can always save more mana and things of the sort. And I will be fair, like, it is a bit situational depending on the run as well, because in a run where, you know, you're constantly stopping to drink, if it's a very slow run, it's like super dad guild sort of vibe, then yeah, maybe if you're on Ebon Rock, you don't mind just full sending Flash Heal for the entire fight, right? Because it's a short fight, they're going to take the time to drink before the next boss or the next pull, so who really cares if you're like 70% overheal on Ebon Rock and you used all your mana if you're going to have it for the next pull. But in any scenario where you're trying to essentially pace, like have a certain pace with the group, right? Have a bit of pep in your step getting through the raid, then any mana you can save on a boss like Ebon Rock, which, you know, doesn't require much healing at all, is mana that you don't have to drink back going into the next thing. So now you can just pull immediately. And that's how I like to play. I think that's the most interesting way to play, right? Trying to make the most of all the little bits of resources that you have. And that's really where my stance on overhealing is. It's not that I think overhealing is intrinsically bad all the time. I don't think if somebody has, you know, above 20% overhealing, they're trash or anything like that. But in most situations, overhealing is just not something that's necessary. And if it's not something that's necessary, you can make improvements by trying to cut it down, okay? And, you know, you can still know the situations where you should be overhealing, right? If you're on Nefarian, the last boss in Blackwing Lair, you know, it's Warrior Call, and the boss is at 20%, then, yeah, why would you not spam the tank, right? And of course, I'm going to be a bit more liberal and let more of those flash heals go through in that circumstance, right? Even if they're somewhat close, even if I think they could be overheal, because the raid's done. So why would I take the chance of the tank dying on Neff at all when I could just absolutely blast him with heals? So there's common sense situations where you obviously want to overheal, and I feel like those are very apparent and will present themselves to you through experience. But for the most part, I think anytime you can use less mana to accomplish the same goal, that's better. I think that's not really that controversial, and HealComm is a super help to do that. So yeah, I don't know, if you're anti-HealComm, I would try it out. I would think about maybe some of the things said in this video, maybe give it a try, see what you think. I would definitely encourage Spec to link this to his guild, see what they think about it. Yeah, I don't know. I've played in quite a few classic guilds. I've played in some pretty good guilds. I don't really do high-level speedrunning, but I play with some really good players in this game, and I've never had issues kind of doing my style of healing with HealComm. And in fact, HealComm's always been very encouraged in those guilds for the exact reason that Spec suggested in his comment, that it just helps saving mana, helps avoiding deaths, help prioritizing who really needs to be healed. So that's my thoughts on Healcom. You'll probably get another video coming for Classic Plus, where we really try and get the devs' attention on this, just to make sure that they don't mess anything up. But for now, this is all I'll say on it. And if you have any questions or anything, leave them in the comments. We can have more discussions down there. But if you guys like the video, feel free to like, comment, subscribe, and I will talk to you guys next time. See ya. I'm coming back on, Diesel.